The first scream vanished into the wind. By the time the sun climbed high enough to blind the horizon, Sarah Whitman's lips were too dry to bleed. Her wrists were tied tight against a fence post, the coarse rope cutting into her skin until her hands turned numb. Her ankles rubbed raw where they met the rope, and the dirt beneath her burned like a stove. Her torn dress clung to her body, heavy with dust and sweat. The flies came before the mercy did. Then came the laughter. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. A small crowd stood at a distance, pretending they didn't see her, pretending they had somewhere else to be. Some crossed the road to avoid her eyes. Others just stared. One man smiled. No one stepped forward. Near the edge of the crowd, an old farmer muttered, "This ain't right." But the words died in his throat when he saw Ethan Grady's hand rest on his gun. The man's shadow stretched across Sarah's face as he spoke, slow, calm, and sharp enough to cut air. "She thought she could steal from me and walk away." The crowd stayed silent. A boy giggled nervously. Ethan lifted her chin with the barrel of his revolver, his gloved hand steady. "Next time you reach for one of my horses, remember this heat. Remember how dust tastes when your mouth's too dry to pray." Sarah spat blood at his boots. "I didn't steal a damn thing." Her voice cracked, but it didn't shake. The crowd gasped. Ethan's grin vanished for a second before he struck her across the face. The sound hit harder than her cry. He turned to the onlookers. "Let her bake a little longer. Maybe by sundown, she'll start telling the truth." The people scattered. The boy ran. Only the wind stayed. Hours passed. The sky turned from gold to white, then to a glare that burned everything beneath it. Every second pressed into her back like a brand. Her thoughts drifted between rage and surrender. Somewhere between the two, her world went quiet. Then came a sound of hooves, slow, heavy, patient. A lone rider followed the ridge above the riverbed. He was an older man with a weathered face and a hat that had seen more storms than rain. Samuel Boone had once been the law around here, but time had taken the shine off his badge and replaced it with regret. He rode now like a man trying to escape his own shadow. When he saw the girl tied under the burning sky, something in him stopped. He dismounted slowly, boots grinding against the dry earth. For a long moment, he just stared. Her head hung low, hair stiff with dirt and sweat. He didn't know her name, but her face dragged up a memory he wished he'd buried. 10 years ago, he'd let her father go, a poor man caught stealing cattle to feed his family. The law said hang him. Samuel said no. He thought mercy might save them. It hadn't. It had destroyed them both. He stepped closer. Sarah lifted her head weakly, her eyes dry and fierce. "Stop looking. Take it off, or I'll find a way myself." Samuel froze. No fear in her tone, only defiance. That hit harder than any bullet he'd ever taken. He pulled a knife from his belt. The blade flashed in the sun as he cut through the rope binding her wrist. Her skin was blistered beneath it. He poured a trickle of water from his canteen into her mouth. She coughed, her body trembling as freedom met pain. The rope gave way. Her arms dropped limp. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. "You know who I am?" he asked quietly. She nodded once. "The man who watched my father die poor." He looked away. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled though the sky was clear. A storm was coming, but not from above. Samuel took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at first, then let it stay. "You'll get yourself killed for this," she whispered. "Maybe," he said, his voice gravel thick. "But I ain't leaving you to fry out here." She looked up at him, squinting through the heat haze. "Maybe you should have kept riding." He half smiled, though it never reached his eyes. "Maybe I should have done a lot of things." The wind picked up, swirling dust around them like a silent witness. And in that empty stretch of desert, two broken lives, one burned by mercy, the other by cruelty, met halfway between guilt and survival. The sun began to fall, painting the dirt in red. Sarah leaned on him as they walked toward his horse. Her legs shook with every step, but her jaw stayed set. Samuel steadied her, his voice low and steady. "Easy now. You're safe." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Ain't no such thing as safe out here." He didn't argue. He knew she was right. When he lifted her onto the horse, she stared back at the empty post where she'd been tied. Her voice came out rough, but certain. "I'll never forget this day." "Good," he said. "Neither will I." As they rode toward the river, the wind carried the smell of dust, blood, and something like redemption, though neither of them dared to call it that yet. The river shimmered under the dying sun as Samuel Boone guided his horse through the shallow water. Sarah Whitman sat weakly in front of him, her head resting against his chest. Every jolt of the saddle made her wince, but she didn't make a sound. The day had taken all her strength. Only her anger was still awake. When they reached the far bank, Samuel dismounted first, then lifted her down carefully. Her knees buckled before her boots even touched the ground. He caught her, one arm around her back, the other steadying her arm. She was light, too light for someone still alive. "Easy now," he murmured. His voice was rough, but gentle in the way that made people believe him. She looked up at him, eyes half-lidded but still full of fight. "You don't even know me. Why'd you bother?" He hesitated, glancing at the cracked earth, the horizon that looked too far away. "Guess I got tired of walking past wrong things." Her mouth twitched, half a smile, half disbelief. "Took you long enough." He almost smiled back. "Yeah, story of my life." They reached a small cabin nestled against a patch of dry grass and broken fencing. It wasn't much, just wood, dust, and a roof that looked one storm away from collapse. But to her, it was the first shadow of safety she'd seen in days. Samuel opened the door, and the hinges groaned like something waking from sleep. The air inside smelled of cedar and smoke. He helped her sit on an old chair by the table, then poured water into a cup from his canteen. She drank slow, her hands trembling. The water slid down her cracked lips, and for a second, she looked almost human again, less like a ghost the desert had tried to erase. "Name's Samuel," he said quietly. "Used to wear a badge once." She met his eyes. "Used to?" He nodded. "Took it off when I realized it didn't mean what I thought it did." Sarah studied him. "And what did it mean?" He shrugged. "Power without heart. Rules without reason. I figured a man ought to know the difference between justice and just doing what he's told." She stared into her cup. "Ethan Grady doesn't." "No," Samuel said. "He don't." Silence filled the small room, heavy but not cold. He watched her trace the rim of the cup with her finger, her nails dirty, skin still marked from the ropes. She looked like a girl who'd been punished for surviving. "Rest," he said softly. "You'll need it." She shook her head. "He'll come for me." Samuel didn't argue. "Then let him come." He built a fire outside while she changed into one of his old shirts, hanging her torn dress near the flames to dry. The shirt hung loose on her, sleeves past her hands, but she didn't care. She sat near the fire, hugging her knees, staring into the orange glow. "You don't even know if I'm telling the truth," she said suddenly. Samuel sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "Don't have to. No one deserves to be treated the way you were." That shut her up. The words sank deep, too deep to answer. For a moment, the only sound was the fire crackling between them. He glanced up at her. "Your father? I remember him. Quiet man. Kept his head down." Her jaw tightened. "He was desperate. You let him go, and they starved anyway." Samuel nodded slowly. "I thought mercy was enough. Turns out mercy don't feed a man." The wind whistled softly through the broken boards of the porch. Sarah looked at the flames, her face flickering between shadow and light. "You feel guilty?" "Every damn day." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Guilt had its own language, and both of them spoke it fluently. After a while, she asked, almost in a whisper, "You ever wish you could go back?" "Every time I close my eyes," he said. For the first time, she believed him. Night thickened. Crickets hummed by the river, and the stars glimmered faintly above the canyon. Samuel added another log to the fire. The sparks rose like fireflies before fading into darkness. Sarah leaned against the porch post, her eyes heavy, her body slowly giving in to exhaustion. He looked at her, really looked. Not at the dirt or the bruises or the defiance, but at the person still fighting under all of it. She reminded him of himself, someone who'd seen too much wrong to believe in good anymore. yet still somehow kept hoping. "You can sleep inside," he said quietly. "The bed's not much, but it's better than the floor." She hesitated, then nodded. "You? I'll stay out here. Been keeping watch for too long to stop now." She didn't argue, just stood slowly, clutching his shirt close, and stepped into the cabin. Before closing the door, she looked back once. "Thanks for not walking away." He tipped his hat. "Did that once. Won't again." When the door shut, Samuel leaned back in his chair, the night air brushing his face. He looked at the stars, the same ones that had watched him fail so many times, and wondered if redemption was still something a man could earn after all these years. And somewhere inside, Sarah finally slept, her dreams thick with dust, fire, and a face she couldn't forget. Morning crept in slow, carried by the smell of smoke and the low crackle of a dying fire. Sarah Whitman woke to the sound of a hammer, sharp, steady, and patient. For a second, she forgot where she was. Then the ache in her wrists reminded her. Her hands still bore the marks of the ropes, thin red lines that burned when she moved. She pushed open the cabin door and stepped out into the golden light. The world looked softer now, less cruel, but still quiet in that tense way, like it was holding its breath. Samuel Boone stood near the fence, shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat tracing down the side of his neck. His shoulders moved with every swing of the hammer, slow and deliberate. "You always this quiet?" she asked. He didn't turn. "Only when I'm thinking how stupid I've been." She smiled faintly. "That must keep you busy." "Every day," he said, and kept hammering. For a while, neither of them spoke. She watched the way he worked, steady hands, tired eyes, a man used to building things after breaking too many. The fence wasn't much, but he rebuilt it like it mattered. Maybe it did. Maybe fixing something small helped keep the rest of him from falling apart. When he finally stopped, he wiped his brow with the back of his hand and looked at her. "You should eat. There's coffee and bread inside." "I'm not hungry," she said, though her voice betrayed her. He just nodded. "Then sit anyway. It's good practice for being alive." Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee and old wood. She sat at the table while he poured her a tin cup. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It just felt like two people learning how to exist in the same space again. After a few sips, she asked quietly, "You think he'll come?" "Ethan Grady?" he said. "Yeah. Men like him don't forget what they think they own." Her stomach tightened. "Then what are you going to do?" He met her eyes. "Whatever I have to." Before she could answer, the sound of hooves broke through the still morning. Two riders approached fast, their shadows stretching across the dirt. Samuel's jaw hardened. He set down his cup and stepped outside, hand already near his gun. The men slowed near the gate. One called out, "Marshal Boone, that woman with you belongs to Ethan Grady. You best hand her over." Samuel didn't flinch. "Belongs?" "Nobody belongs to any man." The taller rider spat to the side. "He says she's a thief. We're just following orders." Samuel stepped forward, the boards of the porch creaking under his boots. His voice was low but carried far. "Last time I followed orders, people died. You sure you want to be that kind of fool?" The riders shifted uneasily. Dust swirled between them like warning smoke. Sarah stood in the doorway, clutching the edge of the frame, her heart pounding. She could see the tremor in Samuel's hand, but also something else, steel. The taller man frowned. "We'll be back with more." Samuel nodded. "Then bring more coffins while you're at it." The men turned their horses and rode off fast, their silhouettes swallowed by the hills. Silence returned, but not peace. The kind of silence that waits for thunder. Sarah stepped down from the porch, her voice barely above a whisper. "You just made things worse." Samuel reloaded his revolver with slow, steady clicks. "Maybe, but maybe it's time someone did for the right reason." She stared at him. There was no fear in his face now, only something heavier. Purpose. For the first time, she saw him not as a man haunted by what he'd done, but as one finally ready to stand for something again. "What happens when they come back?" she asked. He looked toward the horizon, where the dust still hung like a promise. "Then we make sure they don't leave the same way." The afternoon burned hot, but neither of them rested. Samuel checked his rifle. Sarah helped patch the cracks in the barn walls, her hands blistering again. But this time, it was her choice. When she stumbled, he steadied her with a quiet, "Easy now." And when she caught him wincing at the old wound in his shoulder, she muttered, "You're worse at hiding pain than I am." He grinned faintly. "You're learning quick." By sunset, the light stretched long across the land. The wind carried the scent of dust and tension. Sarah stood by the fence, watching the horizon fade to red. "You ever think it's worth it? Standing up when you know you'll lose?" Samuel came to stand beside her, his voice low. "Sometimes losing's the only thing that makes a man worth remembering." She looked at him for a long moment, her throat tight. "Then I hope you're worth remembering." He turned to her, eyes catching the last light of day. "I ain't the one you'll need to remember, Sarah." And though neither said it out loud, both knew, when the sun rose again, blood would answer for everything silence had allowed. Night came heavy with heat and dust, pressing against the old cabin like it wanted to crawl inside. Sarah Whitman couldn't sleep. Every creak of the wood made her flinch. She lay on the small bed, staring at the ceiling, counting each breath until the sound of the hammering wind faded into silence. Her wrists still burned from the rope, but it wasn't just her skin that hurt. It was the part of her that still believed life might ever be kind again. Outside, Samuel Boone sat by the fire, sharpening his knife in slow, careful strokes. The sparks flared and died, just like the thoughts running through his head. The smell of smoke clung to him, mixing with sweat and guilt. He had been the law once, a man people trusted. But now, sitting under a starless sky, he wasn't sure he even trusted himself. He glanced toward the cabin door. He could see her shadow moving behind the curtain, restless. She reminded him of a wild horse that had been broken too many times, skittish, proud, but still alive. And he couldn't decide if saving her made him feel redeemed or just more aware of how far he'd fallen. After a while, Sarah stepped out, barefoot, wrapped in his old shirt. The firelight brushed across her face, catching the tiny scars along her cheek where Ethan's hand had struck her. Her hair hung loose, tangled but soft in the orange glow. "You don't sleep either?" she asked quietly. Samuel shook his head. "Haven't in years." She sat down across from him, pulling her knees close. The fire cracked between them, its warmth fragile against the cold edges of the night. For a long time, they didn't speak. Finally, she said, "You ever think maybe we deserve what happens to us?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "No one deserves cruelty." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "I'm not talking about cruelty. I mean life. The way it hits us. Maybe we earn it without knowing." He ran his thumb along the blade, watching it catch the firelight. "I used to think that too. Then I realized bad men sleep easy, and good ones can't close their eyes. Doesn't sound much like justice to me." She didn't answer, but he saw the corner of her mouth twitch, the kind of small reaction that meant she was listening, even if she didn't want to. The fire popped, sending a tiny ember floating between them. She followed it with her eyes, whispering, "You think he's coming tonight?" Samuel sighed. "Yeah, Ethan's the kind who can't stand losing. He'll come. Men like him always come." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Then we should leave. Go somewhere else, anywhere else." He looked at her, tired but firm. "You can't outrun a man like that. He don't chase with his feet, he chases with fear. You run, he wins." Her voice cracked. "So what? We just wait here until he shows up to kill us." "We stand," he said. "That's what we do." The words hung in the air, simple but steady. And for some reason, they settled the panic in her chest better than any promise of escape could have. He reached behind him, pulling a small shotgun from where it rested by the chair. He handed it to her, handle first. "You ever use one of these?" She looked at it, hesitant. "No, and I don't plan to start." "Plans change," he said softly. "Fear's a fine teacher." She took it, her hands shaking. The weight surprised her. It wasn't just metal, it was trust. She held it awkwardly across her knees. "What if I freeze?" He leaned forward, eyes steady on hers. "Then I'll move. You don't got to do everything. Just don't close your eyes." She nodded slowly. Her breath steadied a little. "Why are you helping me, really?" He paused. The question lingered long enough for the fire to burn lower. "Because no one helped your father when he needed it." and I've been trying to make up for that ever since. Sarah stared into the flames. You can't make up for something that's gone. I know, he said, but I can make sure his daughter don't end the same way. The wind picked up, brushing dust across the porch. It carried a strange stillness with it, the kind that only comes before a storm. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Sarah flinched at the sound. Samuel didn't move. After a while, she whispered, "When you were marshal, did you ever kill anyone?" He looked down at his hands, the lines of them, the scars from years gone by. Too many. Thought I was serving justice. Turns out I was just obeying fear in a different uniform. She studied his face, creased, tired, honest. You ever regret it? He met her gaze. Every time I breathe. Something inside her softened. She didn't say thank you. She just sat there, watching him as the firelight flickered against his worn features. He looked more human in that light. Less like a man from a story and more like someone who'd simply kept living when life told him to stop. A few minutes later, she whispered, "You really think we can win?" He gave a faint smile. Winning's not the point. Surviving's the start. She didn't know why, but that line made her chest tighten. She looked down at the gun in her hands, then at the man across from her. For the first time in years, she felt something close to faith. Faith not in God, not in justice, but in another broken person trying to do right. When she finally stood to go back inside, she paused at the doorway. "You should sleep a little," she said softly. "I will," he lied. She gave a small smile, one that didn't reach her eyes, but still felt real. "You're a terrible liar, Samuel. Been told that before." She stepped inside, and he watched the door close. Then he stared into the flames until they faded into dying embers. The night pressed closer, and the darkness whispered with the sound of hooves far off in the distance. He reached for his revolver, checked the chamber, and breathed out slow. "Guess it's time," he muttered, and outside the cabin, the wind began to shift, carrying with it the faint, unmistakable smell of smoke and men coming with fire. The first sound was faint, a single horse, then two, then more. Samuel Boone was already awake, sitting on the porch, gun across his lap. The dawn hadn't yet broken, but the horizon carried that red line that always warned of trouble before light came. Inside, Sarah Whitman stirred at the noise. She stepped outside, barefoot, clutching the shotgun he'd given her the night before. The air smelled of smoke and dry grass, and somewhere far off, metal clinked against saddle buckles. "They're here, aren't they?" she whispered. Samuel nodded. "Yeah, just like I figured." He rose slowly, wincing as his bad shoulder pulled against his shirt. He didn't say anything about the pain. He just started loading bullets one by one, each click cutting through the silence like a metronome for fate. Sarah looked toward the hills and saw them. 5 riders this time, their torches bobbing in the dark like fireflies from hell. At the front was Ethan Grady, his hat pulled low, face set like stone. Her stomach twisted, and she gripped the shotgun tighter. "I don't even know how to use this thing," she said, voice cracking. "You'll learn fast," Samuel said, calm as stone. "Fear teaches better than I ever could." The riders stopped just outside the fence. Ethan's voice cut through the morning. "Boone, you got something that belongs to me." Samuel stepped forward. "Don't see your name on her." Ethan laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that made Sarah's heart sink. "You always were a righteous fool. You think saving her makes you a hero? She's a thief, a liar, a nothing. Hand her over, and I'll let you keep breathing." Samuel's hand rested on his revolver. "You got one chance to turn around, Ethan. Take it before I make sure you never ride again." Ethan grinned. "You ain't the law anymore, old man." "No," Samuel said, voice low. "But law don't mean much when justice has been starved too long." Gunfire cracked the dawn. The first shot came from Ethan's side, shattering a fence post inches from Samuel's arm. Then everything broke loose, flashes, smoke, horses screaming. Samuel moved with the memory of a man who'd lived this life before. He fired once, then again, hitting one rider square in the chest, another in the leg. Sarah ducked behind the porch post, trembling, then remembered his words, "Don't close your eyes." She aimed, barely breathing, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed her shoulder back, but the blast caught one man's horse, sending it crashing to the ground. "Good," Samuel shouted, ducking behind the water trough as another bullet tore through the air. "Keep your head low." Ethan dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt. "You're making a mistake, Boone," he yelled. Samuel reloaded, voice steady. "Ain't the first time." A torch flew through the air, landing on the barn roof. Flames shot up fast, bright against the dim morning. Smoke curled thick, choking the air. Sarah coughed, tears burning her eyes. Ethan stepped closer, gun raised. Last chance. Samuel stood tall, revolver aimed straight. "You don't get to give chances anymore." He fired. The shot hit Ethan's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He fell to one knee, cursing, tried to lift his gun again. Before he could, Sarah fired a second time. The shotgun blast threw dust and smoke around them, knocking Ethan backward into the dirt. His hat flew off, rolling toward the fire. Sarah froze, the shotgun shaking in her hands. Did I kill him?" Samuel limped toward her, grabbing her arm gently. "Not yet, but he'll wish you had." Behind them, one of the riders groaned, crawling toward his horse. The rest had scattered, vanishing into the haze. The barn burned high, heat licking across the yard. Villagers appeared from the distance, drawn by the noise. The same people who had watched her tied to that post, now staring at Ethan lying in the dirt. None of them spoke. Not one dare move. The old man from before stepped forward, hat in hand. "Sheriff's on his way," he said quietly to Samuel. Samuel nodded, holstering his gun. "About damn time." Sarah stared at Ethan, his blood mixing with dust. He looked smaller now, weaker, human. Her voice trembled. "He's not dead." Samuel met her eyes, then let the law finish what it forgot to start. For a long time, no one moved. The only sound was fire chewing through wood and the slow rasp of Ethan's breath. When the sheriff finally rode in, Samuel stepped back. He didn't need to say a word. The scene spoke for itself. As Ethan was dragged away, Samuel turned toward Sarah. Her hands were still shaking, her face streaked with sweat and ash. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did what you had to." She swallowed hard, staring at the burning barn. "It doesn't feel like victory." "It never does," he said quietly. "But sometimes surviving's the only win we get." The fire roared behind them as the sun broke over the ridge. The red light spilled across the field, catching in Sarah's hair and the tears on her cheeks. She whispered, "What happens now?" Samuel looked toward the river, his voice low and certain. "Now we live with it." By the time the smoke cleared, morning had turned pale and quiet. The barn was gone, just blackened beams and the faint hiss of cooling ash. Sarah Whitman stood barefoot in the dirt, her face streaked with soot and sweat. Her hand still trembled from the shotgun, though she tried to hide it by clutching the edge of her borrowed shirt. Her breathing came in short, uneven waves, like her body hadn't caught up with the fact that she was still alive. Samuel Boone was sitting a few feet away, shoulder wrapped in a strip of her torn dress. Blood had soaked through, but he didn't seem to care. He was staring at the horizon, watching the sun climb past the burnt roof. He'd seen too many mornings like this, quiet ones that followed chaos, mornings that didn't feel like forgiveness but demanded it anyway. Neither spoke for a long time. Silence did what words couldn't. Sarah finally knelt beside him, her voice low. "I didn't mean to shoot him like that. I just wanted him to stop." Samuel turned his head, meeting her eyes. They were raw, red, but steady. "You did what you had to. A man like Ethan. You don't stop unless you make him." She swallowed hard. "Still feels wrong." He nodded. "It always does. That's how you know you ain't like him." A tear slid down her cheek, and she wiped it fast, angry at herself for letting it show. Samuel pretended not to notice. He'd learned that sometimes kindness meant pretending not to see someone break. The sheriff had come and gone, dragging Ethan and what was left of his men toward town. People whispered, the way small towns always do when justice shows up late. Some said Samuel had lost his mind. Others said he'd finally found it again. By noon, the yard was nearly empty. Only Sarah and Samuel remained, surrounded by the quiet ruin of what they'd survived. The air smelled of smoke, iron, and something new. Peace, maybe, or the fragile start of it. Sarah looked around the wreckage, then back at him. You should have let me go when you had the chance. He smiled faintly. And do what? Go back to being a man who lets bad things happen? I already tried that. Didn't like who I became. Her eyes softened. You're bleeding again. Yeah, he said, glancing at his shoulder. Guess I'm too stubborn to die right. She reached for the bandage, fingers brushing his arm as she tightened the knot. Her hands were rough, but gentle. He caught her wrist for a second, holding it, not to stop her, just to feel something real. You don't owe me this, he said quietly. She looked up. You don't get to decide what I owe. The air between them changed, heavy but not painful. It wasn't romance, not the kind from stories. It was survival recognizing itself in another face. Later, they walked down to the river. The water moved slow, catching pieces of ash as it drifted by. Sarah knelt by the edge, washing her hands, watching the soot swirl away in thin gray ribbons. You ever think we can start over? She asked. Samuel stared at his reflection in the water. Older, harder, but still breathing. Starting over's just living different after you know better. She smiled a little, but her eyes were sad. Then maybe we start small. He nodded. Small's fine. World's built on small things. That afternoon, they began cleaning what was left. Samuel hammered new planks over the broken windows, while Sarah swept ashes from the doorway. The rhythm of work filled the space between them. Hammer, breath, heartbeat. Every sound was a reminder that they'd survived something meant to end them. When she tripped on a fallen beam, Samuel caught her before she fell. Their faces were close enough for her to see the gray in his stubble, the small scar at the corner of his lip. You okay? He asked. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yeah, just tired. Good kind or bad kind? She thought for a moment. The kind that means I might sleep tonight. He smiled, soft and sad. Then that's the best kind. By sunset, the yard looked less broken. Still scarred, but standing. Samuel sat on the porch steps, rubbing his shoulder as Sarah brought him a cup of water. She didn't say anything when she handed it over. She just sat beside him. The light turned gold across the river, painting their faces in the same hue. Birds were returning, cautious but curious. The air smelled of rain somewhere far away. Feels strange, Sarah said. Like everything's ended and started at the same time. That's how life works, he said. Ends and starts ain't much different. Only the people in between change. She looked at him, the corner of her mouth lifting. You always talk like that. He chuckled softly. Only when I think someone's listening. For the first time, she laughed, quiet, shaky, but real. The kind of laugh that comes from remembering what it feels like to breathe without fear. As the sky darkened, Samuel leaned back against the porch post, eyes half closed. You ever think your father would have wanted this for you? She thought about it. Maybe not like this, she said. But he'd be glad I lived long enough to find out what I'm made of. Samuel nodded slowly, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Guess that makes two of us. The stars began to appear, one by one, faint and patient. For the first time since the heat of that terrible day, Sarah didn't flinch at the quiet. She just sat beside him, both of them staring out at the water. And for a little while, the past didn't feel so heavy. It just felt like something that had finally stopped chasing them. Days turned into weeks, and the land began to remember what peace felt like. The grass that had turned to ash slowly grew green again along the fence line. The river flowed clearer. The smell of burned wood faded, replaced by the scent of wet soil and new mornings. Sarah Whitman woke earlier now, before the sun, helping Samuel Boone patch the barn roof or mend tools left rusting too long. She had scars on her wrists, but she stopped hiding them. They were proof of pain, yes, but also of endurance. Samuel never asked about them, and she never explained. Some things didn't need words anymore. One morning, as she was sweeping the porch, Samuel stepped out holding 2 tin mugs of coffee. His shoulder was still wrapped, but the wound had started to heal. He handed her 1 cup, and she took it with a quiet smile. You always this serious in the morning? He asked. She sipped, glancing at him. You always talk too much before sunrise. He chuckled, a sound that carried warmth in it, something he hadn't felt in years. Guess that makes us even. The light broke across the hills, soft and golden. For a moment, everything looked almost holy. Samuel leaned against the post, staring at the open land. You know, he said slowly, I used to think all this land was just dirt. Now I see it's been forgiving me this whole time. Sarah tilted her head. Forgiving you for what? For staying alive when better men didn't, he said simply. She looked away, because the honesty in his voice felt like a mirror she wasn't ready to face. You ever think we're not meant to fix everything? He smiled faintly. I stopped believing in fixing. Now I just try not to break what's left. They worked side by side through the day, mending fences, painting the cabin door, planting seeds in a small patch of ground by the river. Sarah's laughter started coming easier, still rare, but brighter each time it broke free. One afternoon, while Samuel was tightening the hinges on the barn, she called out from the porch, You missed a spot. He glanced over his shoulder. You sure you want to tell a man with a hammer he's wrong? I've told worse men worse things, she shot back. He laughed, loud this time, and she joined him. The sound echoed across the empty land like something the earth had been waiting to hear. Later that evening, when the sky turned pink, Samuel built a small fire near the riverbank. Sarah brought down 2 plates of stew she'd cooked, though she apologized before they even started eating. Don't expect much. I'm still learning. He tasted it and smiled. Tastes like trying. That's better than most folks cook. She grinned. You always been this kind? He shook his head. No. Used to be mean as a kicked mule. Guess I'm just tired of fighting everything. They sat by the fire, watching the light dance across the water. The sound of crickets filled the air, and a soft wind moved through the grass. Sarah leaned back, gazing at the stars. You think it's possible to forgive the people who hurt us? Samuel's voice dropped low. Maybe not, but we can stop letting them own the rest of our lives. That's close enough. She looked at him, her face calm in the glow of the fire. You ever forgive yourself? He paused for a long time before answering. Not yet. She reached out, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. Then maybe that's what we're both here for. He didn't pull away. To forgive each other? No, she said softly. To remember how. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt full, like the space after rain, heavy with something alive. They stayed by the fire until it burned low. Samuel told her stories from when he was young, riding with his first badge, thinking justice was as simple as right and wrong. She listened, her chin resting on her knees, eyes fixed on him. When his voice grew quiet, she said, You know what I remember most from that day you found me? He looked at her. What's that? You didn't look at me like I was broken. You looked at me like I could still stand. He smiled sadly. That's because I needed to believe someone could. The stars shimmered on the surface of the river, rippling with every breath of wind. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a carved wooden bird, rough around the edges. I made this, she said shyly, placing it in his hand. For all the things I don't know how to say. He turned it over slowly, thumb tracing the small, uneven wings. It's perfect, he murmured. It's not, she said. He looked at her, eyes soft. Then it's just like us. She smiled, tears glinting in the firelight. Neither said another word. The fire crackled, the river whispered, and in the middle of all that quiet, 2 people who'd lost nearly everything found something that almost felt like home. That night, before she went inside, she paused at the door. You ever think we were meant to find each other? He stared into the fire, his voice low and steady. No, but I think we were meant to stay once we did. And that was enough. The seasons shifted quietly, like time itself was tired of shouting. The river ran higher with spring, and the hills turned soft and green again. The cabin, once half-burned and hollow, stood steady now, patched with fresh boards and the scent of cedar. Sarah Whitman and Samuel Boone had built something small and strong, a place where silence didn't hurt anymore. Some mornings, Sarah would wake before sunrise and watch the mist crawl along the riverbank. She'd hear Samuel moving around the kitchen, humming tunelessly while making coffee. The sound was steady, real, and alive. It reminded her of something she hadn't dared believe in for a long time: peace. One morning, she found him sitting outside, staring at the fence line where wildflowers had begun to bloom. His hair had gone grayer, his hands slower, but his eyes were lighter now, unburdened in a way she'd never seen before. "You're quiet today," she said, sitting beside him. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking how strange it is. Took me my whole life to understand that fighting for the right thing don't always mean winning. Sometimes it just means staying." She nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You did stay, when you didn't have to." He looked at her, his voice soft. "So did you." They sat for a long time like that, listening to the wind move through the grass. The kind of quiet they shared wasn't heavy anymore. It was a kind of grace, the kind that comes after you've made peace with your ghosts. Later, they walked down to the river. The water was cool and clear, the same place where he'd first brought her, the same place she'd washed the dirt and blood from her hands. She knelt again, touching the surface lightly. "You ever think the world forgets the bad things?" Samuel shook his head. "No, the world don't forget, but it lets new things grow in their place. That's close enough to forgiveness for me." She smiled at that, watching a small fish dart through the shallows. "You think we deserve this peace?" He thought for a moment, then said, "No one deserves peace, Sarah. You earn it every day you wake up and choose not to be angry anymore." That stayed with her. As days turned into months, their rhythm became a kind of quiet poetry, mending fences, tending to the garden, talking in half sentences that always meant more than they said. There were nights they said nothing at all, just sat by the fire, side by side, watching the river reflect the stars. Sometimes he'd catch her carving bits of wood into little shapes, birds, horses, stars. She said it calmed her. Once, she handed him another carving, smaller than the first. A bird again, wings spread. "For when you forget you can still fly," she said. He held it for a long time, turning it over in his hand. "You know," he said, "I used to think the worst thing a man could do was fail. Now I think it's forgetting he can change." She smiled. "Then maybe we both stopped doing the worst thing." That night, as the fire burned low and the wind moved gently through the valley, Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. The stars above the river shimmered like old promises finally kept. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to, because they both understood now. The world doesn't erase what's broken. It just teaches you how to live with the cracks. And that was the moral of their story. That mercy isn't weakness. That forgiveness isn't forgetting. And that sometimes the people we meet at our lowest are the ones who remind us how to stand again. The land around them was quiet, the kind of quiet that meant healing. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled, soft and harmless this time. Samuel smiled to himself. "Storm's passing," he said. Sarah nodded, watching the clouds drift apart. "Yeah," she whispered. "It finally is." And under that wide western sky, scarred, beautiful, and endless, they sat together, not as savior and survivor, not as lawman and outlaw, but as two souls who'd finally learned the hardest truth of all, that even after the fire, life still finds a way to grow. Moral message: even after pain, loss, and regret, life gives second chances. Redemption isn't found in revenge. It's found in the quiet act of forgiving yourself and helping someone else stand again.